So welcome back. We're looking forward, B'ez Hashem, to conclude the 8th Igeres HaKodesh, the 8th Holy Epistle, Holy Letter of the Alter Rebbe. We mentioned many times this segment in Tanya is Igeres HaKodesh. It's not like chapters which are basically one idea divided into many chapters. Igeres HaKodesh. This segment is unique in the way that every letter, of course, is separate from the previous letter. We did mention so many times there's a common thread between most of the letters in the Igeres HaKodesh, underscoring, accentuating the mitzvah of Tzedakah, but in the end of the day, Igeres HaKodesh was written into a community and based on a certain circumstance, based on a certain idea which the Alter Rebbe wanted to arouse in that time, in that juncture of time, and that situation, and so on. When we talk about Tzedakah, you can even see over here the Alter Rebbe concluding this very chapter, even though he underscores the whole idea of Tefillah, but he says Tefillah is the Matzmiach Yeshuais from the Zerei Tzedakah, the sprouting of deliverance, that Hashem is able to expose himself and make that unique connection with the Yid at the time that he prays, that the Yid should have that sensation of closeness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the sprout of Tzedakah, the sprout of rather Hashem's Yeshua, Hashem's deliverance, which this is definitely the message of this chapter, underscoring the ability of the Yid's ability to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with a very strong, close, intimate type of connection with Hashem, which is of course a great kindness, a great extension of Hashem, to be able to establish that type of closeness, not only a connection to Hashem, which is by every mitzvah that a person performs, that he performs. Mitzvah is Melashon Tzafsa v'chibur. Mitzvah, by definition, means connection. But nonetheless, certainly when a Yid learns Torah, the union when a Yid learning Torah, there's no other union which exists in all of our ways that we're able to relate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The union of Torah, unite with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the union of Torah is far greater, far deeper, as Dr. Rebbe explains it in different chapters in the Kuti Amarim. Famously, in the 5th chapter, again, intimates it throughout the entire Tanya. For that matter, the words of Talmud Torah Kineged Kulam, so underscored in the Alter Rebbe's Kuti Amarim, and throughout, for that matter, by example, was one of the greatest figures, giants in Limud HaTorah throughout of all of history. Known to be the Rav Shulchan Aruch, but in general, I say known to be because just the other day someone asked me, is the Bala Tanya the Rav Shulchan Aruch? And is a learned individual. The Alter Rebbe's Limud HaTorah is unprecedented. By example, the Talmud Torah Kineged Kulan live this evidently, but as Alter Rebbe tells us in the famous chapter, 5th chapter, 23rd chapter, 37th chapter of Likutei Amarim, the greatest union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is through learning Torah, greater than any other union. However, prayer, the Yid not only connects with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, unites with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but it becomes an evidential type of unity, meaning to say that Hashem, it gives the ability for the Yid to appreciate that union, to sense that union. It could become a true, exhilarating, sensational experience, and it's meant to. That's what prayer is all about, losing oneself into that relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a very sensational manner. That is, of course, a great kindness of Hashem, a great extension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this is the significant part of the message of this very chapter. But the Alter Rebbe says, how do we gain that? Based on what the Gemara says, based on this expression, you plan charity, you're able to matzmiach, you're able to sprout this deliverance. Based on the part of the Gemara, Rabbi Yehud, Rabbi Lezer, yoiv pruta la'oni, v'hadr matzla. He used to give tzedakah and then daven because he knew that in order to merit this type of exposure of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to that level, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu allows the Yid to have that sensational experience with him, with Hashem, is a great Yeshua, Ani betzedek echze fonecha. It's about echze. It's about connecting to the pnimius of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the panech of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rebbe Lezer, I've followed that. But ani betzedek, with tzedakah, I'm able to merit the echze panech. Through zerei tzedakah is sowing tzedakah, matzmiach Yeshua is I'm able to sprout this Yeshua, that type of closeness with Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe points out why zerei tzedakah is. It's a giving tzedakah, nosing tzedakah, which would be the classic expression. The generic expression for giving tzedakah would be nosing. For that matter, nosing tite, the Torah says, give a lot of tzedakah, but it's nesina. Why zerei tzedakah is why planting. So the Rebbe says the truth of the matter is that Hashem should be able to expose himself to the Yid in that manner, and that level. It's beyond measure per measure, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself established. This rule that he deals with creation in general, the Yid in particular, the specific Yid into the individual Yid, the prati pratis, midah keneged midah, measure per measure. Again, this is an overarching rule by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that this is the way he deals with creation. And again, creation in general, the Yid in particular. And Alter Rebbe points out this is not, again, you can see the previous classes, of course, we're saying this with maximum brevity, but the Alter Rebbe points out this is Ein Min Amida. This doesn't follow the measure per measure rule of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, manner of conduct of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because this is beyond the measurement. That Hashem should expose himself to that degree that the Yid should have and be able to have sense that type of relationship and that level of profundity, that depth, that appreciation, that delight, that excitement, that exhilaration. That's Ein Min Hamidah. So that's why the expression is Zerei Tzedakah. So the Alter Rebbe gives the mashal, the example that one plants in the earth. It's not just the seed that's growing. The seed will arouse the Koyach HaTzemeach, the sprouting energy within the earth, which is inherent in the earth, in order to grow, to sprout, not only significantly and with greater measures, sometimes be'ein arech, which means a total different type of growth in comparison to this which was invested. It's a tiny kernel. You have so many kernels. Again, we mentioned by zriya, by sowing, it's a quantitative difference. By planting, it's qualitative and quantitative. A small seed, an apple seed, of an apple, for example, would produce an apple tree. There's no comparison. It's not only multiplicity of that seed, because the apples look very different. In other words, when it comes to kernels, it's the same, it's a kernel, and many kernels and a sheaf and so on, but it's the kernel which grows. It's more of a quantitative difference. Here, the seed produces a full apple tree, which is a qualitative difference and a quantitative difference. One small seed produces this grand, beautiful tree with so many apples on it, as an example. So it's not the seed which is establishing that. For that matter, the seed spoils into the earth, but rather the earth itself has an inherent explosive, if you will, koyach of tzmicha, a koyach of sprout. You planted it, and you arouse the koyach of tzmicha, this force and this energy of sprout which exists inherently in the earth, and that takes over, and that rather performs. It was just aroused, and it performs, and because it has an enormous koyach of tzmicha, it's able to produce that type of grand and expansive type of growth in comparison to what you planted, but you invested. Says the Alter Rebbe that a Yid gives tzedakah. He's zerei tzedakah. He's planting it on the malchus on high, which is connected to chesed, as the malchus and the midas are connected. Again, you've got to see the last class. And the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he arouses through the malchus, which is called the eretz, and it's in one in the end of the day with the midas, which is higher than malchus, and it arouses the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. At this point, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's chesed extends itself to the davener, to the Yid who's davening and is trying to make that connection. It allows the Yid to experience a total different experience vis-a-vis any other mitzvah, not only a connection, but a sensational experience with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is pretty much what we learned till now. And in order to see these previous classes, or you're following, or wherever you're following, but if you missed the class, or if you want to see this information, which was just repeated, wherever you're watching it, but there is an advantage, as we mentioned time and again, on the original website, tanyaonline.com, which is the original website with the Tanya online, one word.com, where you have the advantage that you're able to tap into the previous classes. They're all lined up on the left side of the screen. For example, on top of this, the latter classes are on top of the screen, easy to access, a click away. You could find, I believe this is the 5th class, if I'm not mistaken, on this chapter, that you can see the last class, the class before, to understand what the Alter Rebbe is coming from and what he's trying to relate, what is he presenting over here in this Igeres HaKodesh. So we were holding in 226 on the original text, which is 6 lines from the top. Ki afshal gdula se'en cheker. Even though to the Gdula of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this Chesed, we know Gdula of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Chesed, Akela, Godel, HaGiber. Godel and Giber is Chesed and Gvura. It's explained many times. Alter Rebbe has it in Shari Chedamuna, also a click away. We didn't mention that we merited to conclude the first 3 segments, and they're all lined up actually on this very site. We also mentioned it's set up also. It's easy to follow any class with the text. This text is on a separate scroll bar, so when you're looking for a particular idea in a particular area on the site, it's also easy to follow, easy to find. Many of the chapters are divided into different classes, so easy to find, easy to follow, and so on. So the Rebbe in the 4th chapter of Sharichas B'Emunah, which is the 3rd segment of this holy Sefer Tanya, and the Alter Rebbe explains the association of Chesed and Gedula b'Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Gedula is greatness, expansion, which is Chesed. Giber is, of course, the mightiness, literally translated, but it's about the strength, stringency, discipline of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as opposed to Gedula is greatness, extension. Chesed, again, you can see it there. So here, the Alter Rebbe says it's the Chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the planting in Malchus. Malchus is connected to Hashem's Midas, and the Midas, the primary Midah, is always Chesed. The Grid Zayar said Chesed is a Midah, the Ozilim Kuliyemin. It stands supreme. It stands in function. It's the main function, or it's the first, and it gives the tone, sets the tone for all Midas. So you have the Gedul of HaKadosh Baruch Hu extending itself to the Yidele who's davening, because he was Zerei Tzedakah. He says Hashem establishing this Matzmei Chishois. So that Rebbe begins in today's class. Afshal Gedula Sein Cheker. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Gedula cannot be fathomed. What Hashem's Gedula all of a sudden focuses and comes to that person's mind and heart, who's davening Hashem's Gedula, is unfathomable. Everything in the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so insignificant, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu's grandeur, Hashem's greatness. So that would seem apparently be overwhelming. Really, you tapped into the Hashem's Gedula. Hashem's Gedula is Ein Cheker. It's like someone says, I was very thirsty, and finally I found a pouring river, a dam that I was able to drink from, as an example. No, that's too overwhelming. You're drinking, you want to quench your thirst. You have to have a cup, which is, again, a limited container, and to take a bit of water from a place that it's easy to take the water from, a stream, a faucet, and so on, and that is able to quench your thirst. When you have overwhelming water, sometimes it becomes counterproductive, meaning to say you're trying to drink, but it's too much for you. So here we say Hashem's Gedula comes in. Okay, you are Matzmiach Yishois because you are Zerei Tzedakah. You planted it in the Artzei Sachayim Antamrini, the saying the Malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, we spoke about last week, and the Malchus connect to Hashem's Midah, so you're tapping to Hashem's Chesed, and therefore this is the Midah Keneged Midah that Hashem is able, or Hashem extends Himself because of His Gedul, because of His Chesed, to your heart and mind when you daven, to be able to sense, to really have that true sensational experience with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, but once we're saying that you tapped into Hashem's Chesed is overwhelming. Dula say ein cheker. You can't fathom Hashem's Chesed to the extent that everything in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is insignificant, because Hashem is overwhelming. And this concept is, we can appreciate it when someone walks into a great person, and in the presence of a great person, a king, a tzaddik as an example. One loses himself into that experience, meaning to say that they can't even appreciate the experience because you feel a total sense of insignificance, that it's not that you're relating to something greater and higher. You don't even relate because you can't relate because the other presence is overwhelming. The presence of the other party is overwhelming. You're relating, you're interacting, you're with a pleasurable interaction. No, you're overwhelmed. And how much more so when you're talking about Kodesh Baruch Hu? So it's so great and it's overwhelming. So how is a person able to appreciate it and have a delightful, pleasurable appreciation? Meaning to say it's contained, like you take a cup of water, because it's so contained. So that brings you the pleasure, the delight. You quench your thirst. It's good. I'm calm now. And so too, the experience of davening is a delightful experience. It's a pleasurable experience, meaning to say that it entered into my container. Whoa, you're talking about Gdula HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Gdula HaKadosh Baruch Hu ein cheker, kol kamei kilo chashiv. It's overwhelming. So how is it contained to the extent that it should cause you that delight and pleasure? As is the Alter Rebbe, b'malkim she'atem meitz Gdula shamat meitz advasanusei. That there's a famous saying about HaKadosh Baruch Hu that where you find His greatness, there you find His humility. Because of Hashem's greatness, and in the area of Hashem's greatness, there you find His humility. It means to say that Hashem's Gdula, part of Hashem's Gdula is His humility, meaning to say that He takes that Gdula and additional to extending it, which in this case, this is what we need in order that there should be the Matzmiach Yeshuos. Because if not, it would not happen. Without the Zeriyah, Zeveyat Tzedakah, which means that without the Tzedakah being there in a way of planting, sowing as an example, that's when you have the Matzmiach Yeshuos. Other than that, like we say, it would never produce that sensational experience. It would be Eina Mina Midah. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu functions Midah Keneged Midah, as we learned. Measure per measure. This is beyond the measurement. So you have to have the Zeriyat Tzedakah, the planting, the sowing. And that arouses the Chesed Elyon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in order to come gushing, in other words, to come and to extend itself to the person. So that's the Gedul of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The problem is that how would it be channeled to the heart and mind and the experience of the Yid who is presently davening? So we say that's the character of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In the very area you find the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which on its own would be overwhelming. There you find the humility of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Hashem is going to be able to contain it. As an example, imagine this overflowing, gushing, rushing type of water would stop because it senses that someone's coming over with a cup of water and is very thirsty, and would so to say form a little stream within the gushing water in order to serve that person which is coming over with a small cup because they want to quench their thirst. That's something very grand. Here you're expressing your grandness, your overwhelming pour, your overwhelming gush, and then you're able to focus into that individual which wants to have that pleasure, so to say, by quenching their thirst, and is able to stop or focus or allow that gush of water to contain itself into that cup in order to serve that person. That's humility. I'm here expressing my great rush, my great gush. In the same token, I'm able to focus on that individual which is thirsty. That's unique, and that's unique about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Again, this is a famous expression about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The area where you find the Gedul of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there you find the humility of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that He's able to contain that great rush and that great Gedula, which is unfathomable. That's the kula, that's the kamei of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and say, I'm going to contain it. I'm going to allow this Yidala who's davening to experience this pleasurable, delightful, sensational experience. And Alter Rebbe says this, K'mayim sheyerdin cholu, very brief, because we did have it in the past, just like water which descends, and there's nothing that descends, nothing comes lower and lower and yet lower, like water. For example, someone gave the other day an example, even comparison to earth. The earth falls from on high, falls below, wherever it kind of lands, that's pretty much where it stays. when it comes to water. When water comes down from on high to below, it just doesn't stay it goes wherever the smallest opening, the smallest crack, the smallest perforation, the water would come into it. If there's something open, it will go lower and lower and yet lower and yet lower. And the same thing when HaKadosh Baruch Hu extends his mayim. Chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is associated with mayim. The Gdula of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because it's compared to water, so it goes lower and lower and lower, and yet lower, in the end of the day, to the Yid who's standing and davening, is trying to connect and trying to appreciate HaKadosh Baruch Hu, trying to experience that sensational experience. That's part of the anvasanusay of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the humility of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to not to just focus on that overwhelming rush of his Gdula, but at the end of the day, focus on that Yid, allowed it to be contained, or even to reach that Yid, because you're talking about the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kula Kamei Kula Chashiv, and the Yid is the Kula Chashiv, that insignificant entity in the face of the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, if you're talking about high and low, you could even classify this as the Yid is low because he's in the face of the high, the great, which is Hashem. He's the Kamei, and then he's Kamei in front of the greatness of Hashem. So he's Kilach Hashiv, he's small, he's low in context. So Hashem's Chesed goes lower and lower and lower, and yet lower until he would come into the heart and mind of this Yid, which is synonymous with what we said before. That's the Almalis of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That in the place where you find the grace of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem is able to say this is coming straight into this Yid's experience, davening experience. The Rebbe continues that Hashem shines in the darkness a light to the straightforward. So the pasuk continues, he's graceful, he's merciful, and he's righteous. So of course, primarily this is referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but this is also referring to the act of man. When man, when man is graceful, and when man is merciful, and man is tzaddik, tzedakah's eye, that he's righteous because he loves righteousness, meaning to say, in the context of tzedakah, to give, to extend tzedakah, he's the zayreat tzedakahs, he causes geirim la'eir Hashem, causes the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu yizrach l'nishmasei, that it should shine to that neshama l'mveshes begufi, which is invested in a body, which stands in darkness, which is the skin of the snake. Skin of the snake. Where does this come in? Over here, we spoke about this so many times. Al Tzedakah has it in a number of places. We spoke about it in a little bit more length in the 55th chapter of Lukuti Amorim, a click away. Lukuti Amorim, which is the first segment, that the body is made up of the skin of the snake, which was the infusion of negativity or klippas, Tzedakah, the negative force which the snake infused in Chava at the time of the Chet Tzaddas, and eventually it caused this whole phenomenon of union of Adam and Chava to have a different perspective, different than the way it was before the sin. It was just like any other mitzvah. We spoke about it then, as it's evident in Torah, V'leiz Beishashu, and he established in this area a total different perspective, again because of the Ruach HaTumah, the impure energy which he imbued into Chava, and therefore right after the sin, Chet Tzadas, it says they right away they were ashamed the way they were in their state of being unclothed. So this whole phenomenon plummeted to an area of klipa, and therefore the whole phenomenon of the body of the human being caused by the union of the masculine and the feminine is associated with moshcha dechavia, associated in Kol, in Zayir, in Kabbalah, the skin of the snake. In other words, what the snake infused into Chava. And the snake was, again, the source then of impurity. and therefore the body of man is called the Moshcha Dechavia, and this is the reason why the body of man has a struggle, which is, again, you see that began immediately right after the Chet, based on this energy which the snake, which was again the source of Tumah at that time, represented Klipa and Sitrach, represented Tumah, imbued into reality, into the starting from the human being, in Chava and so on. And at the time of Chet Tzadas, through his persuasion, and that caused that the body, the body by the human being, this is what the person has to fight off throughout a lifetime, Chas v'Shalom, to just give in to the bodily and animalistic drives, covets, proclivities, and so on. Now, it's not that the body is completely meant to be shunned. Of course not. We work with our body to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We elevate, we refine our body. We domesticate, again, the animal soul, the Nefesh HaBahamis. It should be a keli to be able to connect to the spiritual, to the Nefesh HaLikis. And the Nefesh HaLikis, in the end of the day, should be dominant, but dominant doesn't mean that you're completely avoiding the whole dynamic of the Nefesh HaBahamis and the Guf, but to the contrary, you dominate in a way that you transform, you're able to influence the animal soul, like the Mishnah says, "V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha," that even it's a hara shel love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is true healthy dominance. That you're able to persuade, you're able to present, establish conviction of the Nefesh HaBahamis, that the Nefesh HaBahamis should want to love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The body, which of course has its own set of desires and proclivities, but it's not that you're shunning it, you're channeling it, that it should be part of the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it on its own, if you do not channel it, of course, as we all know, it could drift away, drive away in areas which are not good. This began from the snake, again, the Nachash HaKadmeni, which had an influence on Adam and Chava at the time of Chet Tzadas. Thus, the body is called the skin of the snake. So this neshama, which is invested in a body, again, we spoke about this quite a few times. You can see it in that chapter. But just to explain what he's saying over here, that the Hashem shines when a yid is chana v'racham v'tzadik, that he demonstrates grace and mercy, and he's just with his tzedakah. He acts in justice by giving tzedakah, with justice by giving tzedakah. So he causes that the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu shines to his neshama, not a neshama, a soul divested of body, but a soul which is invested in body, which stands in the darkness of Elam Hazeh, which is the Moshcha Dechavi, the skin of the snake, meaning to say, when despite its connection and its total investment in the guf, in its body there, which of course causes on its own a certain opacity, a certain coverage, a certain eclipse over the brightness and shine over the neshama. That's what the guf and Nefesh HaBahamis usually do on its own if they're not channeled. So there could be, this is the great kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Matzmiach Yeshua is through the Zerei Tzedakah, that Hashem says, despite your neshama is invested in a body, and despite it be difficult to understand and perceive and appreciate how a yid, where his neshama is invested in an animal soul in a body, could be able to have that sensational relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as we asked, and we elaborate on that question in this chapter. Click away, a few clicks away, depends on which part of this page you're going to look into. Again, there was a few ways Al Rebbe expressed this question. So, but as Hashem says, when you're going to do the tzedakah, you're zerei tzedakah. It's not just giving tzedakah. You plant, you sow the tzedakah. You have the enormous bracha of Hashem. You have the enormous expression of the bli gvul of Hashem's chesed, and Hashem will shine, and you will be able to have that sensational experience, despite your neshama is very well anchored or established and invested. That is in Elam Hazeh, in the physical world, in an animal soul. Here he doesn't say the word animal soul, but it's the same idea, because the guf is the chayis of the guf. The natural inclinations of the body come from the animal souls. Al Rebbe writes in the very first chapter of Likutei Amorim, the first chapter of the entire Sefer, Ki nefesh b'damhi, The blood, which filters through the entire body, and establishes the body with its own set of gravitations, where it gravitates to, how it expresses itself, together with the nefesh bahamis, mashcha dechavia, the skin of the snake. It's entered very well involved, and very well rather invested or enclosed, that is, in the animal soul and in the body, and yet the yid is able to have that that lichtige type of davening, because zarach leisharim, that Hashem shines, zarach b'cheshech, in that state of darkness, when the neshama is not divested of body but invested in body, which causes a certain opaqueness, cheshech, of course. Nonetheless, because he was Eretz Yisrael, Hashem is matzmiach Yeshuas, and shines in that darkness this light, leisharim, to the straightforward, because the yid is a chanam v'racham v'tzadik, which is again expressed by his giving tzedakah. That's a deliverance, where the darkness is transformed to light, which comes through usually davening. That is the archetype Yeshua. Because just simply explain why these hapcha is called Yeshua more than, let's say, skafia, the subduction, means to say the subduing of the animal soul or the body to something greater. The transformation, as opposed to the transformation, the answer is very simple. Because when you have a foe, as an example, and you're able to overcome and triumph and crush even the foe, in the end of the day, they can reassemble, regather, rebuild themselves up, and come against you one more time, and another time, and another time. So you're victorious time and again, but nonetheless, the threat remains. Am Yisrael went out of Mitzrayim, they crushed the Egyptians. 7 days later, they're right there at their doorstep, or right there behind them. Hashem had to make another miracle to obliterate them. The greatest success, or the greatest triumph, the greatest victory is when the foe becomes an ally. Then not only you won at the time, but there is no threat anymore. That's the true Yeshua, that's the true deliverance. That when he's when the darkness is transformed to light, then in this case, the Yid is able to appreciate Elokus, because when you daven, it's not that it is subduing themselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The whole point is, again, we said it's a sensational experience. It's a delightful experience. It's a pleasurable experience. In pleasure, there's nothing else which is, when one is experiencing pleasure, there's nothing else which they're going away from. They're all taken over by that delight, by that pleasure. And that is, by definition, the experience of davening. So it causes not only a skafia, this is a true transformation of the nefesh bahamis, which is part of that experience one way or another, because the neshama is invested in the animal soul, which is invested in the body. So there is ishapcha. This is the beauty of davening. It's delightful. It's pleasurable. And not only the person knowing it's right and wants to have that union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is usually by the other mitzvah. That's why the Kabbalah's oil, accepting the yoke of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because I really want to be one. But in this case, it's not only the connecting with Hashem, but it's that delightful and pleasurable connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Thus, hishapcha, it's a transformative experience. And that's what davening is all about. That's why that's the true Yeshua, that's the true deliverance. And that's the matzmiach Yeshuas, which comes through the Zerei Tzedakah. Zeu matzmiach Yeshuas. She Yeshua zu tzemachas. This is what is the sprout of deliverance, which we're talking about over here, that the Yeshua zu, this deliverance, tzemachas mitzrias tzedakah, shezeirin be'eretz aliyena, sprouts from the sowing of tzedakah, which one sows in the supreme land, which we said it's Malchus. We explained this in last week's class, a click away, towards the end of last week's class. Eretz Chayfetz, which is the desirable land, which is the Shechina, divine presence. Again, we mentioned so many times why the Eretz Chayfetz Malchus is about the Shechina, the difference of the Midas beyond Malchus, that would be the Kuchebrichu. Shechina is the Malchus, which becomes Malchus Malchus Kolilomim, which is synonymous with the idea of Shochenet. It dwells, it comes into a Pnimius. This is Malchus. This is called the Eretz Chayfetz. This is called Knesset Yisrael. as explained a number of times also, Malchus is where there's the Knisa, which means all the energy of above is contained, and that's the source of the Yid, of Yidden in general. So when you plant the Tzedakah, you're planting it in this Eretz Yisrael, the supreme land, which would be Malchus, which would be Eretz Chayfetz, which would be Shechina, Eretz Yisrael, Shnikras Kein, Hashem Mislabeshes Betachteinim Lachiyasam. Because Shechina, as we just said, is synonymous with Halbasha. It comes in and it dwells. It's not Hashem the way Hashem is transcendent. Hashem is for himself, by himself, which is higher than Malchus. We spoke about this many times. You could see it in Shayich and Vamuna. We mentioned many times these words in conjunction with this which we say every single day before Baruch Sha'amar, which many say it before many mitzvahs that they perform, L'Shem Yichud, or all the mitzvahs, we say it once a day because it looks after, if you will, over all the mitzvahs and Torah that we would learn, L'Shem Yichud Kucha B'richu Shchinte, the unity, the oneness of the Kucha B'richu Shchinte. We even asked the question rhetorically, what does it mean Kucha B'richu Shchinte? Apparently, Kucha B'richu is Hashem. Shechina is, of course, Hashem. Every child knows that. Ask a child who's Kucha B'richu, it's Hashem. Who's the Shechina is Hashem. What does it mean that we're davening, we're doing our mitzvah, Hashem Yichud, the unity of Kucha B'richu, Shechinte? There's a quarrel, there's a chas v'shalom, two deities which they're not getting along, and we're going to daven now, Hashem Yichud. There should be that unity of Kucha B'richu, Shechinte. Of course, it shouldn't even be negated. But the simple reason is, the simple meaning of this is, there's the transcendent dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, the way He's formed himself by Himself, which is Kutsha B'richu B'lashon Kodesh, removed, holy. And then there's a Shechinte, excuse me, the dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which invests into creation in general, or relating to something out of Himself. That's why Malchus, it says in Pasuk Yochum, Malchus is Peh, which is the idea of speech. The phenomenon of speech is the same idea, that up till speech, it's all for myself, by myself. I think, I feel. Sometimes the other party can tap into it, but it's always inaccurate, because who could know what goes on by the other party? It's within the way I'm for myself, by myself. Speech is, I'm relating something from what goes on with me to another party. That's my extension to something else out of me, dealing with it. And therefore my speech has to be coherent, because I'm trying to relate something to another party. It ought to make sense. So I'm already confining this which goes on, this which I'm experiencing, and I'm putting it into words for the other party to hear, to appreciate, to identify, perhaps to sympathize, and so on. So too there's the Hashem, the ways Hashem has formed himself by himself, transcendent of creation, transcending and being involved to that extent. Shechina, conversely, is Hashem sheshochenet, it dwells, it's Hashem extending himself. The Yichud Kucha B'richu, this is the point of mitzvahs, to fuse the two, the transcendent dimension of HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the Shechina, this which comes in to creation, becomes the force of creation. In other words, the creation should ultimately sense the deepest parts within HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and be able to fuse with the deepest parts of the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which will come to fruition, or Mashiach will come. Why Hashem Melech Al Kol Haaretz, Hashem's reign will be felt and sensed upon the entire land. Not only the shul, the base of Medrash, or the koil, but the land will be full with the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The pasuk says, "Malad is Deas Hashem." Deya means to say that there will be that understanding and appreciation, a deep, profound understanding and appreciation. The world will have, the physical world. The physical flesh will be able to see. These are psukim would say the physical eye will be able to identify HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because of the performance of Torah, mitzvah, learning Torah, the performance of mitzvahs of Yidden throughout all generations. What they did is the asara kaf b'shekel HaKodesh, the fusion between aseres hadibris and asara mamoris. Saying this brief, but we spoke about this, you could understand. Asara mamoris is this which is the creating force. The Shechina Malchus Chamachos Kol Aseres Hadibres is the Anoichi Hashem Elikecha. The way Hashem is for himself, by himself, to the extent of Anoichi, the core essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That is what Aseres Hadibres is all about, representing all of Torah, all of mitzvahs. Asara Kapik Shakla Kodesh. The point is the fusion between the two. L'Shem Yichud Kucha B'richu Shechinte. That's the whole point of Torah mitzvahs. And again, a Yid learns Torah and does mitzvahs, he's causing it individually in his own personal life and collectively all of Am Yisrael, and eventually because the Yid does his Aveda in this very physical world, which is the reason why Hashem created this physical world. There should be the freedom of choice, and the Yid should choose to choose life, to be able to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in these different ways of connection through Torah, Tefillah, and Tzedakah, and ultimately establishing that unity of the Kuchabricha and the Shechinte. That, of course, will come to fruition, and Mashiach will come, which is, again, Mashiach's coming, as the Alter Rebbe has it a few times. It's not just all of a sudden something great will happen. It's a result. It's a direct consequence, of Ma'aseinu, V'Avedaseinu, the actions and the service of the Yid, individually and collectively, all of Am Yisrael. And therefore Mashiach's coming, the idea that there will be the total revelation of the deepest levels of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this very physical world. So this is the Shechina, which is called Shechina because Mislabeshes Betachtenim Lachyaisam. It invests in the inferior, means to say the Eilemes Tachte, not only Eilemes Elyonim, which are more sensitive to the divine, but even the Eilemes Tachteinim, and namely this very physical world, which ain't Tachten L'Matimena, that doesn't go lower. In other words, in Hashem's expression, Hashem's creating, being a creator of all these worlds. This is the lowest. This is where Hashem is mislabeshes in all levels of Tachteinim till this very physical world. Lachyesom, to give it life, like it says Malchus Chol Malchus Kol Ilami. That this Malchus Shechina becomes the energy which would vitalize, which would bring the energy of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to all the worlds. And therefore, when a Yid plants in this Eretz, which is connected in the end of the day to all Midas, in the end of the day, the Tzedakah just arouses, just again, like we went back to when you plant the earth in the Eretz, the physical Eretz. So what you're doing is, it's not the seed is establishing this growth, but the seed is arousing the earth, which has this atomic energy, if you will, molecular energy, explosive energy, and just waiting to be able, the moment you arouse it, whoa, there's a takeover in these great and greatest measures, which is no comparison to what you invested, a small seed, beautiful big apple tree. Even the kernel, the quantity of kernels which come from one kernel, it's the difference is there's no connection, if you will. Of course, there is a connection because the kernel aroused the keichat tzemach, but once it is aroused, it produces a total different type of growth and sprout. And again, when it comes to planting, it's even more, like we mentioned, as the Alter Rebbe says, here it's not only a quantitative difference, it's a qualitative difference. Because it's not the seed. The seed arouses the keichat tzemach within the earth, and therefore the keich of sprout, rather, which exists in the earth. So too, when a Yid gives tzedakah, it's not that tzedakah is causing direct this revelation, Hashem's exposure for the Yid who davens to have that pleasurable, delightful experience with that type of close, intimate relation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No, that cannot happen. That's Eini Min Amida. There's no measure per measure phenomenon or expression being expressed at the time of the Yid's davening. At the time of the whole expression, meaning say the Yid giving tzedakah and echse panecha, to be able to tune into the pnimis of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No, that's Eini Min Amida. But what's happening is, so it's similar to when you look at the seed, and the seed itself would bring this big apple tree, that would be Eini Min Amida as well. The reason why, in the end of the day, it does work, because the seed is not what produces the apple tree. The seed arouses the keichat tzemach, the keich of sprout within the earth, and that is what produces this great production. In this case, this great apple tree, this big, beautiful apple tree. And so too, when he gives tzedakah, that Hashem should reveal Himself, expose Himself to him, to the Yid, rather, who davens, and that it's not because it's tzedakah itself is causing that, but Zereyat tzedakah, he sowed the tzedakah in the Eretz Elyona, in the Malchus on high, which is connected to Hashem Midas. It triggered Hashem to express Himself. And when Hashem expresses Himself, you're talking about the Gedula, the Chesed, Bli Gvul of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Whoa, does it come rushing down, and it's able to rush down into the heart and mind of that particular Yid who's davening. And again, it's catered, meaning to say it's contained, which is again part of Hashem's humbleness, and that He's able to, as He expresses His great Gedula, He's able to make sure that it also fits into the heart. In other words, it's talking to, it's expressing itself and it's connecting with the heart and mind of that Yid who davens. The Rebbe concludes this chapter, and specifically, and literally translated befrat mina prat, very much specifically meaning to say that it's unique. This whole come about of Hashem's smicha, the sprout, is specific when you sow in Eretz HaKodesh HaTachteina, which means the land, the holy land of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on this plane, on this realm, in this physical world, meaning to say on the physical realm, in the physical plane, which is of course Eretz Yisrael. We did mention many times that throughout the Eretz HaKodesh, you find very much the mitzvah, the Alter Rebbe accentuating the mitzvah of Tzedakah, but there was also, or namely, the Alter Rebbe was campaigning strongly for that group of Chassidim which went together with their great mentor and great Rebbe, Mendel Horodokir, with their aliyah to Eretz Yisrael, the famous aliyah with Mendel Horodokir, with his Chassidim to Eretz Yisrael, and famous again. You can see the history. They had this great urge, of course, to live and to serve Hashem in Eretz HaKodesh, in the Holy Land, which is of course the most unique place and the most natural place where a Yid is meant to be. And they succeeded to come into Eretz Yisrael at the time to make this aliyah. They established themselves in Tzfas and in Tveria, but unfortunately they experienced a very, very difficult experience in the context of poverty, great poverty, as it's known in the history of Rabbeinu Ladoka with Chassidim in Eretz Yisrael at that time. So Alter Rebbe campaigned very strongly and raised serious money in order to provide for this group, and made it a personal campaign, which you see it again throughout the Eretz HaKodesh. These are letters which are written again, appealing to his Chassidim, to Anash, and to others to support this group. Additional to Alter Rebbe underscoring the mitzvah of tzedakah in all types of tzedakahs, so uniquely expressed and explained and presented so uniquely in Eretz HaKodesh. But on top of that, or together with that, or very much in that spirit, Alter Rebbe was appealing to Yidden, in particular Chassidim, that they should, so to say, galvanize their energy towards this group of Chassidim which went up to Eretz Yisrael, made Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael at the time. So Alter Rebbe says it over here also. When you're giving tzedakah to Eretz Yisrael, you're able to have the matzmiach yeshuas much quicker. Because planting in the Eretz Eliyona, in Malchus, in the Eretz on high, the supreme level of Eretz, exists by every type of tzedakah. But when you plant in Eretz HaKodesh, which is that Eretz which corresponds to that Eretz Eliyona like no other land. This is why Eretz Yisrael is so holy. Like we say, Yerushalayim Shel Maila, Yerushalayim Shel Mata. It's the same Yerushalayim on a spiritual plane and a physical plane. This is one of the greatnesses of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, one of the great gifts HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, Eretz Yisrael. It's not just He designated a land where Yidden are meant to live. They should have their own commonwealth. No, it's much deeper than that. The Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz HaKodesh. It's a holy land. Hashem imparted from His holiness, and established when He created the world. He said that territory has my inherent holiness. That's why Eretz Yisrael, all these dinim, these halachas exist with the territory of Eretz Yisrael. Yerushalayim has another type of level of kedusha, and of course the Beis Hamikdash, and within the area of the Beis Hamikdash, the Harabayis and the Azara and the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kadoshim, because this is where the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, where the kedusha of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is manifest. And this Eretz HaKodesh corresponds to the Eretz Chayfetz on high. And a quick example: someone has the best type of earth to produce the best type of the word, which is plowed and soiled and so on, and planting in there, you have the best production. And you're in that area, and that area is covered with regular, good, solid earth. But the good, real stuff which establishes, so to say, the best productions is just right under there, and it just corresponds to there. It's mixed together with it. So planting there, you don't, and you can't get, let's say, to the lower area for whatever reason. But that's where you're going to plant, because it's connected. The two earths are connected. And that's going to bring the greatest production as opposed to you plant somewhere else. And so too, and Hashem, Alter Rebbe is saying, of course, every tzedakah, is you're performing the Zerei Tzedakahs. Of course, Hashem is going to be Matzmiach Yeshuis, because you're planting into the Eretz Eliyana, to the Eretz Chayfetz, into Malchus, which is connected to Hashem's Midas, into the Chesed. And Hashem's Gedula and Hashem's greatness and kindness, which rushes down, and in the end of the day comes into the heart and mind of the davener, the one who's davening. Granted. But when you planted Eretz HaKodesh, which is the counterpart of the Eretz Chayfetz on high, there's nothing interrupting between the Eretz Chayfetz on high to the Eretz Yisrael, or the Eretz Yisrael to the Eretz Chayfetz on high. And therefore, sowing in Eretz Yisrael has a much quicker and greater and deeper effect than any other tzedakah as such. And this is what the Alter Rebbe writes, that of course the idea of tzedakah exists, any type of tzedakah. But when b'frat min ha'prat, when you specifically, rather, when you sow in Eretz HaKodesh HaTachteina Mechuvenes Kineged Mamash, which corresponds towards its counterpart on high, the Eretz Chayfetz Hazriya Nikletas Takef Miyad Eretz Eliyana, and the sowing is immediately absorbed when you plant in this level of Eretz Yisrael, your tzedakah, it's immediately absorbed on the counterpart Eretz Yisrael on high, the Eretz Chayfetz, without any prevention. Because there's nothing would interrupt and as a divider between the lands, plural, of life, the Eretz Yisrael down here and the Eretz Chayfetz on high. And therefore, when you plant in Eretz Yisrael, it's immediately absorbed on the Eretz Chayfetz on high, in that level of Malchus, which is connected to the Midas, which arouses the Chesed, which causes this bligvul, the kindness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to rush down and to connect to the Yidin who davening, or that Yidel who's davening, experiencing that sensational, pleasurable, delightful experience. So giving tzedakah to Eretz Yisrael per se has that immediate effect, even more than any other tzedakah, even though the other tzedakah as well, of course, has that effect, because that's what tzedakah is all about. Tzedakah is Zerei Tzedakahs. But when you give it, you plant it in Eretz Yisrael, because there's nothing as a divider between Eretz HaKodesh and the Eretz Chayfetz on high, so it's immediately absorbed in the Eretz Chayfetz on high, this level of Malchus, Shechina, and so on. This is the great gateway to heaven, which is, of course, expression of Yaakov Avinu when he was traveling from Yetz Yaakov and Be'er Shabbat, when he came to that place where, at the end of the day, the Beis Hamikdash will be built. He was in Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim, and in the area of the Beis Hamikdash. He says, "This is Shara Shamayim. This is the gateway to heaven." It's like you're in a place and you want to get to the second level. You know, there's another story, and you're looking, and you found the gate. The gateway, the gate which goes from this level to the other level. Yaakov Avinu says, Zeh Shara Shamayim. This Eretz Yisrael is the gateway to heaven, which is synonymous with what he said over here. There's nothing which is mafsi between Eretz Yisrael, the land of Eretz Yisrael here, the holy land of Eretz Yisrael, to the Eretz Chayfetz on high. Zeh Shara Shamayim. That's the gateway to Shamayim, to the counterpart, to the Eretz on high. So planting in Eretz Yisrael, it's immediately absorbed in the Eretz Chayfetz on high, which causes that reciprocation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Which is the Tzemeach, Matzmiach Yeshua, is through that Zerei Tzedakahs. Mashaykim b'chutz la'aretz, as opposed to when you give tzedakah, not in Eretz Yisrael. Of course, you have that as well as Zerei Tzedakahs. You're also planting, and you're also Matzmiach Yeshuas. The more you give tzedakah, besides all the Yeshuas would come, there's something unique via giving tzedakah, that you're able to connect emotionally with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ani betzedek echse panecho, but you can't compare to giving tzedakah in Eretz Yisrael towards causes in Eretz Yisrael. Dailid Mavin, to this fine Rosh Hashanah, it's enough said to the one, the understander in these matters.